few people trickling in. First, I want to introduce myself. My name is Chris Denby. I am CEO of the Advisory Board for the Arts, and I'm joined by my co-host Andrea Rurale from the SDA Bocconi School in Milan. We are both so thrilled to have you here today and to welcome you to this very important conversation. I'm just going to start with a couple of technical notes before we start in earnest. First of all, we have a very large group of participants here, almost 200 people so far. And I think this is a testament to the subject matter and the importance of what we're going to be covering. We have about 90 minutes together and an extraordinary panel of speakers who are going to be spending time with all of us, sharing their thoughts and giving you the opportunity to ask them questions, to hear from them, to learn from them. A little bit more about that in a minute. Because of the large number of participants, we are keeping everybody's videos and audio off so that we don't have any technical difficulties except for our speakers. And we ask that you communicate with us, however, and with each other through the chat function of Zoom, which I'm sure at this point in our Zoom lives from the last few weeks, everyone is quite familiar with how that works. And I've noticed that already some people are greeting each other on the chat, but feel free to practice doing that right now using the chat function that should be at the bottom of your screen if you hit chat. And please go ahead and welcome yourself and mention who you are and where you're from. We will use this chat function to take your questions. So at any point across our 90 minutes, please feel free to write in questions that you might have. General questions are ones that are specific to any of our speakers, and we will try to get to as many as possible. Our plan, although we're going to try to keep it somewhat informal and fluid, is to go through a series of mini interviews with each of our 4 participants across the first hour, and then to dedicate the last half hour to your questions. So we will be accumulating them in the course of the first hour, and then trying to get to as many as possible in the final 30 minutes. I want to mention that this webinar is being recorded so that everybody is aware of that, but also because we will make it available to all of you and anyone you would like to send it to or share it with. It will be on our website, advisoryboardarts.com, presumably this afternoon or later today or at the latest tomorrow morning. We will also be sending around a summary of the conversation today, and we will tell you about that at the end of our time together. So I think those are some of the key sort of ground rules I wanted to start out with here. I'd like to introduce my colleague Karen Freeman, who is the Executive Director of Research for the Advisory Board for the Arts, and who is helping us out here today on all the producing aspects of this webinar. She will be collecting your questions and asking questions as we go along. Karen, is there anything else I've missed that I should share with this group before we get going?
Nope, delighted to be here, and please feel free to send your questions privately to me if you prefer. Thanks.
As I said, I'm delighted to have such a large group now. I think we're at a count of about 220, as you can tell. And if you take a look, we have an extraordinary group of organizations represented here in this webinar. Organizations from probably, I think by last count, over 15 different countries across Europe, probably over 100 organizations of every different possible type. We have opera companies, ballet companies, museums, historical sites, foundations. And I think that is the strength of what we are going to try to achieve across the next 90 minutes, which is to learn from each other, to learn from an extraordinary group and diverse group of organizations that are all in slightly different ways, but all facing similar challenges pertaining to this extraordinarily strange period that we all find ourselves in. So I greatly appreciate this group coming together. And of course, I greatly appreciate all of the speakers who have agreed to spend their time with us today. I think I've covered most of the technical aspects of this webinar, but if you are unfamiliar with Zoom or this is one of your first few times working with Zoom, again, a reminder that the way to participate in this is primarily through the chat function that we have for you. And you know, it seems very much already from all the communication I'm seeing, I will then be able to see questions that come across. This is a fantastic collaboration, this webinar, between the Advisory Board for the Arts and the SDA Bocconi School. And I am thrilled to turn it over now to my co-host, Andrea Rurale, for some words of introduction.
Thank you, Chris, and hello, everybody. We're very honored to co-host this webinar with such an outstanding panel. And through the, mainly apart from the educational activity in the master in the program that we run, but particularly in the Arts Culture Knowledge Center, which is a knowledge center that is based in this a business school, we are actually facing, particularly in the past weeks, how actually the theme of fundraising was not only important for per se, so how to get to know the most suitable way to maintain and keep on doing fundraising and engagement with the audience through all the cultural institutions, not only in Italy, but in Europe. But this particular moment of that we're living, this emergency, put on the surface, come on the surface, lot of managerial issue that can be problems for the institution, but at least a way of rethinking not the mission, but the way the mission is organized and executed in all the different cultural institutions. And talking individually with them, we came to understand that a networking activity like this is absolutely very, very, very important. And thank you a lot, Chris, for this. I also want to introduce and say hi to my colleagues, Pier Giacomo Miondale Carbonare, who is assisting me in this direction of the programs and the Cultural Knowledge Center. And I think there is no need to take any more time, but leave the floor to our panelists for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I wanted to also take a minute to introduce you to, I mentioned that I'm CEO of the Advisory Board for the Arts. Many of you have probably not heard of the Advisory Board for the Arts simply because we are a new organization that has just gotten going in this past year. We're not even a year old. We are a company that has come together to focus on the ability to help the arts world across the entire world, across all art forms. We are essentially a cross between a research organization and a consulting firm. We bring both skill sets together, and our objective, we are a membership-based organization, and each of our members are, again, opera companies, presenters, theater companies. Our focus is on trying to help bring outside-in perspectives to the arts and to leverage the networking power of organizations from across geographies and across art forms come together. We seek to broker great ideas, whether those ideas come from Singapore, Topeka, Kansas, Madrid, or Norway. And we seek to find ideas from across the arts, but also from outside of the arts, and bring them and adapt them to different geographies, different settings, different size of organizations. And so this idea of the power of ideas coming from unusual sources is at the source of what we do. As you can see on this slide, our concept is to forge partnerships with our members to drive breakthrough research initiatives on topics as wide as audience growth, donor growth, customer experience, revenue strategies, so on and so forth. We are delighted that we are already present on 4 different continents in terms of the members that we work with, and delighted to be able to extend our resources and our work to the arts world in general, which is why we have started a series of webinars such as this one today, which is designed to help the arts world regardless of whether organizations are members of ours or not. And so we hope that this is helpful to all of you, and I welcome your questions and comments if you have any others at any point about the Advisory Board for the Arts. But I would like to introduce my colleague, Pilar Cárdenas, who joins us from Madrid. Pilar, would you like to say a quick hello?
Just a quick hello. Thank you very much for being here with us. And I think it would be very useful for all of us to have this conversation.
We have an amazing panel of speakers today, and amazing for a number of different reasons. One of them is because of the diversity of types of organizations that they lead and represent. Diversity of geography, of course, as we're going to travel from Spain to Hungary to Italy. But similar in one respect, which is all of them represent some really interesting approaches and ideas for how to think about fundraising during this really strange time. We made this topic, this conversation today, very specific to Europe because we know that there are unique characteristics and elements to what fundraising means in Europe. That there is almost also a shift. Part of our stock and trade is to try to talk to hundreds and hundreds of organizations, art leaders across the world. And across the last year, pre-COVID-19, everything we were hearing in Europe in particular was about a concern about the need to diversify funding sources, that no longer should arts organization expect or rely upon the ability for public support to continue to be the primary form of support, or at the very least, there is a common sentiment that public support for the arts is likely to diminish. That's at least what we were hearing until a month ago. And we've been asking ourselves the question, is that going to change? Are we going to have to rely on individual giving, on non-governmental giving, non-public support more or less after COVID-19? And so to get this conversation going, we thought it would be fun to just ask you what you believe on that regard. So you're going to see on your screen here a quick poll. We're just going to do this together in the moment. What do you think is going to happen a year or two from now? Is public support for the arts likely to decrease? Or because of this crisis, is it likely to, in fact, increase? Or is it likely to just stay the same? A little bit of an imperfect question, of course, but we thought it'd be fun to kind of take the pulse of this group before we get into a conversation about individual giving and sort of private support. And we are frankly just curious about whether we believe people in general, governments and public funding is going to be affected by the COVID-19 crisis and in what direction. So I see many of you are already answering. I will reveal the results of this in just a moment, which I think will be interesting and useful to how we frame the conversation going forward. So I'm just going to let that roll for another 30 seconds or so, and then I'll let you take a look at what you believe in terms of public support. And of course, it may very well be different, not only from one country to another, but sometimes from one region to another or one city to another, depending on the funding structure that everybody is experiencing in their own particular geographies. So Karen, I think we're at a point where most people have voted, so maybe we'll show folks the results. It'll be interesting to see if this is a surprise to anyone. But the theme that we were hearing prior to COVID-19 about likelihood that public support will continue to reduce over time seems confirmed by this group anyway. The majority of people who responded seem to feel that there will be a decrease in public funding, which of course means that a reliance on alternative sources will be just as important, if not more important, than pre-COVID-19. So interesting to realize that this is at least the sentiment of the group. We will take this poll away now, but we will make sure to send you the results in our recap of the webinar afterwards. At this point, I'd like to ask each of our 4 speakers to briefly introduce themselves before we proceed with our very first conversation. So Julia, maybe we could start with you.
Yes, thank you, Chris, for inviting me. I'm really excited about this opportunity. It's fantastic to have this conversation. So yeah, I'm Julia. I'm the CEO of the Reina Sofia School of Music. I think you're all seeing my bio there, so I don't go much into details. What I'm saying about the school is that we have a double mission. On one hand, we are training young musicians to become professionals. And on the second hand, our second part of the mission is to try to bring music closer to society. So that's what we are trying to do, support the team in this double mission.
Thank you, Julia. Borja, maybe we'll ask you to introduce yourself now. We just need to get you off of mute. No, we're still not hearing you, Borja. There we go.
Sorry, could you hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Chris, for inviting me. I'm delighted to be in such a great group. Just a few words about my career. I worked for Banco Santander for the last 30 years. By the way, Santander is the biggest bank in the Eurozone. And I've been I have been a banker for many years, and some years ago, I was invited to take care of what we call corporate social responsibility. It was a very interesting time. And at the end of this period, I started running the Santander Foundation. Santander Foundation has three main lines of activities: arts and culture, environment, and social actions. And we have been working very close to the Escuela Reina Sofía, the School of Music Reina Sofía. So that was the reason for me to be here with Julia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Borja. Susana, we're going to ask you to introduce yourself now. You're still on mute. There we go.
Hi. Thank you for including me in this panel. I'm Zsuzsanna Deák from the Budapest Festival Orchestra. I'm based in Budapest, Hungary, and the orchestra is famous for its innovative concert forms as well as its extreme social responsibility. Many educational and social programs which have been introduced by our leading conductor Ivan Fischer, including autism-friendly co-co concerts for children, synagogue concerts in abandoned synagogues in Hungary, as well as church concerts where the music of Bach, etc., can be heard in the original form. These are, of course, all free programs and extremely important to us to bring music to those people who can't go to concerts.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Gabrielle, last but not least.
Hello, everybody. Very honored and happy to be here. I'm the director of the archaeological park of Paestum in southern Italy, which is a ancient Greek colony, and it's mostly famous for three Greek temples, which are still standing here and have had an enormous impact on also modern European culture and the rediscovery of ancient Greek architecture and culture. And our mission is, we are a state museum, and we have the mission to conservate and do research on this site and to share it with the public. And one of our goals in these years has been to develop a more inclusive approach. So inclusive on the level of economic accessibility, but also community engagement. We have a series of programs for people with disabilities. And so what we're trying to do is to be something more than simply an archaeological site and museum, which is of course our core activity, but we want also to be a point of reference for the area, for the population, for the citizens, and offer a place for them to meet and to have discussions and to see conferences and to get in contact and in exchange.
Thank you, Gabrielle, and welcome. Thanks again to all four of you. Each one of these three different groups of speakers in our minds represents a very interesting angle, and we will sort of delve upon maybe two or three specific themes as we talk about fundraising in Europe at this particular time. One, the theme of corporate support and sponsorship models. One, a focus on individual people and individual giving and the personal aspect of individual giving, and one on community support of fundraising through this time. So you'll see that each one will represent a very interesting angle, very interesting specific element of the fundraising story as it's going on in Europe at the moment. We're going to begin with Julia and her extraordinary leadership of one of the leading music schools, of course, the Reina Sofia School in Madrid. And I think one of the things that we should start with as we tell the story of fundraising at the Reina Sofia School, Julia, is for us to give you a little bit of background, give our participants a little bit of background on the funding structure of the school, the sponsorship model, how that fits into the bigger picture of how the school is funded. So we have a little bit of a sense for what is truly unique there.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, we have a very strong, I feel, business model. So actually we have 60% of our funds come from private sponsoring, around 20% come from the public sector, and then 10% is our own generated income. So we feel that we have a very diversified model. And out of those 60% private sponsors, we have around 110 companies. Of those, corporations and individuals, and 28% are individuals. So we largely have a very corporate-based sponsorship model. And you know, our approach to fundraising is somehow linked a little bit to my own personal experience. So I came into fundraising from a private sector experience. I used to work in consulting, and then I did an MBA. So I have a very typical management career. And then I developed a program in education, Teach First Spain. So I was like really sensitive to education and the need to bring causes closer to the society. So my personal approach and our approach as an organization when we are looking to fundraising is that we need to be sustainable. And in that sense, we feel like we're managing a business and we feel responsible for our P&L. So we have to develop like really excellent systematic and commercial approaches. But on the other hand, we are very aware that we have a very unique purpose. And that's, we have to make our sponsors respect, value, and what we say is getting love with our mission, which is basically our students, our music. So we want our sponsors to live closely to our mission and to understand how crucial we are for society in a broader sense, and for them in particular. And you know, I can talk a lot about this. I don't want to take a lot of time, but in general, in the last years, when we're talking about model, we see a transition. Maybe 10 years ago, fundraising was more about, you know, selling a product. So you have an extraordinary project, which is our case, you know, a music school or a museum or a theater. And I see that that's transitioning into looking for lifelong partners. And that's the way we approach fundraising. So that implies understanding really what is the mission, the worries, the priority of the donor, could be individual or could be a corporation, and then offer personalized benefits and co-create projects that are aligned to those values and priorities.
That's great. And it's definitely an extraordinary model that has been very successful to you. I'm curious, before we turn to the COVID-19 aspect of this, do you feel that the model that you've built is a replicable model for other arts organizations, or are there certain characteristics that are completely unique to Reina Sofia School and therefore not replicable?
Yeah, actually, I think they are very I mentioned before our overarching strategy, because actually when it came this crisis, we continue with this philosophy of having our sponsor as partners. So the first thing we did, you know, we get together as a team, both with the board and also with the management team, and we set very clear objectives. We say we want to be close to our sponsors, to our donors, that they feel that we care about them. Of course, they are crucial because they are donors, but also as persons, because the way they consider them. And then we thought, how can we add them value in this process? And we eventually think that, you know, digital was one way we could add them a lot of value. And so lastly, we've been creating a lot of very valuable content. On one hand, we created a concert with all the students performing in their houses, a Bocconi concert that was a homage to the workers in Madrid. And then we talked to different sponsors, and you can see in the number 3, this is the photograph at the beginning of the video. It has more than 70,000 reproductions. So it was a way to get in contact and nurture that relationship with our sponsors. Then we also, we created a lot of personalized content. Actually, it was the best accelerator of our digitalization strategy was actually the crisis. And we created personalized content then for their employees, so sections of content depending on their preference. So we try to alleviate the confinement through music, music for kids, music for young people. Then we also created content for their marketing campaigns. For instance, with Telefónica, which is one of our main sponsors, we joined their campaign, we Keep Connected. And then another thing we did besides, taking care about them, being close to them, provide them through digital a lot of content. We are also having a very holistic approach involving contact at all different levels. So we have from the chairman of the board to myself as CEO, also the development director, being continually in contact to all our contacts at all different levels.
Can you comment on the way in which the COVID-19 crisis has impacted you from a funding standpoint? What kind of consequences have occurred, and what have you had to change as a result of that?
Well, it has changed many things actually. If we're thinking at the moment in time we're initiating contacts, new donors, potential donors, and then we stopped reaching to new donors or potential donors. Of course, we have to try to keep them closer, the ones that were already initiated. And then, we are a musical institution, so we have to stop all our concerts. One of our sponsoring strategies is based on concerts. So we do a lot of concerts for our sponsors, more than 100, for their employees, for the stakeholders, for their investors or customers. So we have to stop that. And so now, it's been just 1 month already, but now we are thinking creatively on how can we offer them other benefits, alternative to the ones that we used to say. So we're thinking about doing music and leadership workshops that we could organize online for the employees of these corporations, where the team building and to build the energy up is so important in these moments. We are thinking how to organize concerts on the open air, respecting social distances. And then, of course, we continue to think how our digital content can actually reinforce the crisis. So I think in this situation, the one that rules is the virus. So it really depends on how this goes, but we have at least all these strategies ready. And I think one example of something great that we are doing with our partners is with Banco Santander, that we have here Borja. So I don't know, Chris, if we can speak this about that or maybe later, but this is a good example of something we've done together, during this situation.
Yeah, we'll get to that particular example in just a minute, if you don't mind. I think I have a couple of questions that I'm sure echo questions that many of our participants have here. As we talk to organizations all across Europe, one of the common refrains is, can we even ask for money right now? Is it ethical? Is it moral? Is it strategic to be asking for money? And I wonder how you answered that question for yourself, and particularly in the context of the conversations you're having with corporate sponsors, but also if you want to comment in terms of individual ones as well.
Yeah, actually the way I think about that question it really depends on each one. So I think there are two different really scenarios depending on your need of liquidity. If you don't need cash, which is our case right now, probably the most smart is to wait to open new deals and, you know, stay close to potential donors where the contacts have already been initiated. I don't know exactly until when, but to ourselves, to the new contacts, we have decided to wait until summer and now concentrate on taking care on nurturing existing ones and put a medium long-term strategy and take the opportunity to improve our existing systems. And then, you know, after the summer, just going systematically, ambitiously to reach new contacts. In case you need liquidity, I think the most important thing is to do a very targeted fundraising. I think you have to do a very thorough cost-benefit analysis. I would probably not recommend a crowdfunding campaign, but focus on funding very specific projects where potential donors will empathize with the need. I think we are thinking about, you know, salaries, scholarships, you know, things that are really crucial. Donors will empathize with the situation. For instance, we saw that in Germany, you know, the employees of the orchestras are creating a fund of 1 million together with the Minister of Culture to help musicians that don't have currently a job. So, you know, if you focus very, very much on the need and very specific, if there's something you can do. And also it's very important who you are going to ask. You have to study very careful which is the sector where the donor, the potential donor is, and, you know, try to go for those ones that have been less affected by the crisis, and also how much you are going to ask. And I would say, you know, in this time, don't be too ambitious and focus more on the need. And if you can wait until, you know, probably after summer where there is more clarity on the situation, I would rather say that's better.
That's wonderful advice. Julia, I'm curious, have you lost any donors through this time? What are you hearing from them? Are they telling you, I'm sorry, but, you know, we are going to have to retrench as well, or you should expect that we will have to retrench? What are you hearing and how are you managing those messages if you're getting any?
Yeah, actually, Chris, you know, when we first talked, I was very optimistic because we didn't lose anyone. And from last week, we already lost 2. So, you know, and I see this might be a trend. And the way that people say to you is like, I'm really sorry, we're going to really uncertain times. You know, in many cases, our sponsors are having like a big impact on their accounts, on their wealth. So that's affecting their sponsorship. I feel that the ones that they have more risk of course, losing and losing that sponsorship are either on sectors that have been very affected. You know, I'm saying tourism, retail, probably sponsors, and also the ones that are more disengaged with you. So I feel the ones that are closer to you, that they realize how important their contribution is to you, they will try to stick with you as young as you can. In both cases, the ones, at least in our case, were 2 sponsors that they weren't as close as we would like to.
Yeah. I'm going to switch in a moment to Borja here, but we have been receiving already a few questions specific to what you have shared, Julia, so I will take 1 or 2 at this point. You mentioned the importance of using the digital medium as a way to perhaps create new customized offerings for your sponsors specifically, as a way to engage them, but also to engage your broader community. Now, one of the questions that came through is, we are all inundated with digital content now. Everybody is putting something out there. How do you cut through the traffic? Or have you found that there are some tricks or some particular strategies that draw more attention to your digital content versus that of everything else that is available from across the world?
That's to me or to Borja, sorry?
For you, Julia, sorry.
Yeah, actually, you know, for instance, we realized the Bocconi concert it has 70,000 reproductions, and that's the 2nd largest number of views on our YouTube channel. You know, if we think what it is that this specific content was so powerful, I think it's because you were able to address what the audience were looking for. I think we're looking for content that provides us comfort, that is not too long. You also want to have some fresh image. And then we are also looking for signs of gratitude. And this was a piece of content that was targeted to, say thank you to our health workers. And I think we all feel part of this cause. And then another important piece in order to put a digital content is to leverage existing relationships. So for instance, in our digital strategy, we create our content together with our sponsors, and they also leverage their own social networks. And we were able to engage people with a lot of followers, and those were our influencers. So I think you have to look for people, the way to reach to the audience, and then do some content that is what people are expecting.
Thank you. One last question. Let's try to perhaps get to it quickly, although it's a very big question, which is, and from one of our participants, it's great to be talking about trying to get more individual money and fundraising and all of that, but do you believe in the ability to put more pressure on public sources of funds? Is there, in fact, anything that one can do as an arts organization to ask governments, public entities to be supporting even more? And I'm thinking a little bit of what you all did with Paloma's article and how influential that was. Maybe in less than 1 minute, you could describe sort of your efforts there.
Yeah, of course. I think raising awareness about the importance of art is critical. This is not a moment of looking each of us to the share of the sector, but making the whole sector more relevant and supporting the artists. Ultimately, having a strong sector benefits everyone. And if politicians see pressure and find a united sector, it is more difficult for them to reduce their arts budgets. So, when there is a crisis, we are competing with health and social causes, social projects for funding. So we make very clear through Paloma's article that the art should be a good of first necessity and is as important, as any other good. And I think that was a powerful statement. Actually, we saw that the minister used the same sentence last week in his conversation with the different regions. And so I think to have a united arts that make very clear the statement about the relevance of the role in society is more than important than ever, and that puts pressure on government officials.
Thank you, Julia. Borja, I'd like to switch to the flip side of the story that we just heard, and the reason we are so pleased to have you here, not only your leadership of one of the leading foundations in Spain and Europe, but also because you represent the other side of that partnership that Julia just described, that of the corporate foundations, the corporate sponsors. So before we talk a little bit about that and sort of delve into your own sort of behind the scenes perspective on what it's like to be a donor in this case, tell us a little bit about the foundation, its role, its extraordinary influence in the arts, and how you think about fundraising at this particular point in time. And you are on mute, by the way, so we just need to take you off of mute.
Yeah. So thank you very much again. Yeah, the foundation has always very interest in the arts. We cooperate. We are helping different institutions, and one of the key points, as Julia was mentioning, was the personal touch. We believe that that's a very important part of the strategy, both for the donors and for the sponsors. We need to learn how the art institutions are working, how they are dealing with all these problems, and we need them to understand what is our current situation. I don't want to be the bad guy today, but we are facing a new scenario around the world. Last Tuesday at this ABA webinar, David Bartlett spoke about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So we are facing this very new, very difficult situation. Stock markets around the world are down. Dividends to be paid by corporations many are freezing. Bankruptcies will be more common. In fact, it's very difficult to deal with markets in which you have negative interest rates, or where you have to pay to someone else to take the oil from your company. So we've never been in such an incredible, difficult situation. But then we need to be positive. The show must go on, and we need to think that the situation will be again something achievable for everyone else. We have community concerns, we have health and medical concerns, and we have economic concerns. But as Julia was mentioning, we need to put the arts also in these concerns, and we can't let the arts be left behind, because otherwise we will not recover from all the time we lose if we let them down.
So Borja, you represent the corporate side of things. And when we talked, you mentioned that clearly, like with any corporation that supports the arts, there needs to be a perceived return. And that return is even harder to defend, argue, prove at this particular juncture. So what recommendations do you have for arts leaders who are trying to help paint a picture of what that return can be for the corporate side of giving in this particularly unusual moment?
Well, the recommendation will be the same at any moment. I mean, you cannot think that someone is going to give you money just because it's a nice project, because there are a lot of nice projects around the world, but because you receive something as a trade, if I may use this expression. I mean, we are happy to work with many opera houses because we can receive something for our customers or for our employees or for our brand. But at the end of the day, we need to put that into a balance and try to convince our patrons that that's a very important issue, and that we will receive something after what we are investing in the institution.
Yeah. So we invited you because, in part, you represent an extremely high-performing partnership between a music school, in this case, an arts organization, and a private foundation. In your experience of working with Julia and the Reina Sofia Music School, what are the characteristics of that partnership that make it particularly strong in your mind, and that may be a role model for other ones that should be built?
Well, also Julia spoke about this very important role of everyone at the organization. So both in the art institutions and in the donors side must be very close. I was speaking about the personal touch, and the personal touch must be achieved in all the levels of the institution. I mean, the chairmen must be very close, the general managers or the CEOs or the experts in the field. Otherwise, when you face a difficult moment like the one we are facing now with the COVID-19, you will lose touch, and it will be easier for them to switch into a different partnership with someone else.
Yeah. So we face a very difficult 6 to 12 months ahead, right? Regardless of who you are, regardless of where you are, whether you are an arts organization or, frankly, if you're a corporation that is facing, extraordinary pressures, and that those pressures end up having repercussions on employment, on funded programs, and so on and so forth. I know you speak regularly to your colleagues in other foundations as well. What are you thinking about the next 6 to 12 months? What are you saying to each other? What are your plans, frankly? I think arts leaders would want to know sort of what should they expect in the next 12 months?
Well, firstly, I will say that it's going to be quite different from one country to another one. So the pandemic is going to affect in different ways to different countries, and even inside any country, it could be different in some parts of them. So that's part of the problem. We don't have a textbook to follow for the future. We don't know how long the pandemic is going to stay with us, and we don't know how we are going to go out of it. Then we need to be prepared to this escalation, as they call it, and try to think in different ways in which we can help the institutions. So you were speaking about the digital aspects, and that's of course very interesting. And we have discovered many digital tools for us to both to work and to listen music or to read books. But then we need to think about much more different things. We believe that it's going to take at least, as you say, 6 to 12 months to be in a new normal, not normal, but new normal situation. And the feeling among other institutions, other sponsors in Spain and some in Europe, is that we are very worried about what's going to be ahead. As I was telling at the beginning, some of the big foundations are fueled by dividends of big corporations, and those have been freezing or have been are going very deeply down into the nearly zero level. So we need to distribute the remaining between the best initiatives. And so it's very important for the art institutions to explain very well what they are doing and how they are helping the sponsors with which they are doing.
Thank you, Borja. Before we move on, Julia, I'm curious if there's any aspect of the relationship with Fundación Santander that you would like to address, or any questions that you would like to ask Borja that you think would be helpful for our group of participants to hear today.
Yeah, I would reiterate what Borja was saying, that it's important to have a multi-level strategy and to be based on trust. And another thing that I think is important for our relationship is the synergies that we create with their priorities. So, you know, they sponsor the piano department for the last 25 years, but we also have conversations for them, and we say, what is important for you as a corporation? And that we know that education for them is key. You know, Santander is probably the corporation that is investing more in education in the world. And so that's why we decide to do concerts for kids and schools. We do that for the Santander. We also have a strong arts program. So we also create synergies with the arts room, and we did an itinerary music all under exhibition. And, you know, and now in terms of the COVID, we did a playlist with all the, you know, the content of the pianists that they've gone through the department that was sponsored by Santander. So I think, you know, this creating synergies with their priorities in education, in arts, and also organizing concerts for their employees, I think it's, you know, adding value to them. As Borja was saying, that's a part of the trade a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Julia.
Maybe, sorry.
Please, Borja.
Yeah, maybe one of the important points here is to be flexible in terms of what we expected before and what we expect afterwards. So we are very happy if we can move from one project to another one, if that makes sense for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Before we move on, and we're going to travel about 1,000 kilometers, I think, to Budapest here. But before we do that, I just wanted to point out, and my colleague Karen may kick me for saying this, I think it's technically possible. With 250 participants on this, I'm seeing a lot of very valuable comments that are being made in the chat room. I am going to get myself out on a limb here and say that we'll be able to share some of these comments with the broader group in our recap after this webinar, because I do think there's some wonderful ideas and perspectives. And this is also by way of saying, please feel free to continue to comment and share thoughts, ideas, experiences, because we will, having seen Karen's nod, now I can affirm that we will share these with you offline in our recap across the next day or so. So please keep going. You are making incredibly useful and interesting comments, and please keep asking questions and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So with that, I'd like to switch gears a little bit and talk about the other end of the spectrum of giving, which is individual giving and private individuals and their roles in working to support arts organizations. And not surprisingly, one of the most innovative arts organizations in the world is also one of the most innovative when it comes to its work with individuals. And a lot of that comes from the extraordinary work of Zsuzsanna, who we welcome here, and thank you for participating and sharing some of your stories about the Budapest Festival Orchestra and what you are doing there. Perhaps we could start with you giving us a quick thumbnail of how does individual giving work with the Budapest Festival Orchestra? When did it start? What role does it play in the broader picture of how the festival orchestra is funded?
Individual giving is a relatively new concept in Hungary because in the communist times such a thing didn't exist, and the Budapest Festival Orchestra was one of the first institutions, cultural institutions that introduced individual giving by creating a supporters club. And in the beginning, in the early 2000s, the main reason to join this club was to be able to pre-book season tickets, because season tickets were very difficult to get. So many people wanted to buy season tickets, there were not enough places. And by becoming a member of the club, people had a pre-booking priority option. And this is how it all started. And since then, the group has extended and has now over 600 members. And our members are extremely loyal. Winning new members is still sometimes a challenge, but keeping our members is never a challenge. Nobody leaves us. Sadly, some people pass away over the years, which is an extremely difficult personal issue for me to face when members of our wonderful club announce the death of another member. But yeah, so getting new members is always a challenge we have to concentrate on, but the club members are so loyal and are a huge part of the festival orchestra's success. In terms of numbers, our funds raised through the supporters club are not extremely huge or significant because it takes about 3 to 4% of our non-public funds. So it's about 50% what we get from government money and municipality money, and the rest is ticket sales, tours, and non-public support. And only 15% of the non-public support is contributed by giving, sponsorship, corporate giving, and individual giving alike. But the personal touch is so important that I think it's one of the reasons why the festival orchestra is so successful in its community and social initiatives, because this group of 600 people is like a family. And it might sound like a commonplace, but in our case, it really is true, because I personally know the names of the grandchildren of many of our supporters, and it's a fantastic relationship we have with them. And so this is a supporters club, and also we have crowdfunding campaigns. And the COVID-19 situation has encouraged us to create a new crowdfunding campaign. We weren't extremely optimistic about the results in the beginning, but the response was so overwhelmingly positive, and the funds received were so much more than we hoped for, that it again proves to us that our base membership is extremely loyal and engaged. And also we receive many givers from overseas, from other countries, thanks to our quarantine soirees, about which you can see now the slideshow. The quarantine soirees is a series of concerts, chamber music concerts, created by our artistic director and main conductor, Ivan Fischer. And every evening we live stream chamber music concerts from our concert hall in Budapest. And thousands of people all around the world follow these concerts. The response is overwhelmingly positive. And it's interesting because today I spoke to somebody from a concert hall in Luxembourg, and they said that people are losing their patience, and a lot of members of the audience start writing them impatient letters, and the general atmosphere is shifting towards a more impatient tone. But for us, we can see from the response of our viewers and the audience and the supporters that this sort of live experience our quarantine soirees offer is extremely reassuring and keeps the personal touch very, very vivid and valid. And the amount of support that has come in over the last few weeks since we started these quarantine soirees in the middle of March has it counts now over 6% of our yearly individual giving amount, which I think is an amazing number and absolutely unexpected. And what I think is that the key words behind this success are the closeness and the personalness and the emotional element of this series of events, because musicians can choose their own pieces to play. For example, some of our musicians have introduced compositions of their own, or compositions by others which are very rarely played. But these interesting and innovative pieces are combined by very traditional string quartets by Mozart and Schubert and so on. So I think the concerts, which everybody can tune into every evening, every single evening since 16th of March, have offered a lot of new as well as well-known music to our audiences. And as I mentioned before, the response has been extremely good and wonderful.
Great. I believe Andrea has a question for you.
Yeah, thank you. Susanna, I was wondering, because it's very interesting, I think, for all the other participants to understand actually a little bit about the business model of this. So the member of this club, the supporter, are eligible to ask, for example, please play the Eine kleine Nachtmusik. Okay, I write this as a member.
This is also an idea. Sorry. Which we introduced.
No, go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's the Make-A-Wish program you mentioned now is independent from our quarantine soirees, which is a set program determined by the musicians. But we introduced for the supporters club, for our members, that they can make a wish and they can choose any tune from any orchestra work, and then the musicians will play it to them.
But the concerts during the quarantine soiree are open only for the members that have a special login to listen to them, or are open to public?
Open to all. It's perfect.
So they are free for everybody. So actually, just to reduce it to the structure is something that is done mainly to, keep engagement and to offer something, asking as an exchange a donation for the institution, right? So it's not an offer that is only specifically for the member that have donated in the past, because this issue is an issue that I do think that all the Italian participants to this webinar will recognize. Many cultural institutions, many theaters are offering, not probably in this so structured way, free concert, free in the, there is the director of the president of the Museum of Violin in Cremona. There is in the auditorium a young player that is playing on a Stradivari something. This is offered for free to everybody. But the point is, will this free content create a sort of increase of revenue now and in the future, or is just a way to providing free content, and after the crisis of coronavirus, all the cultural institution needs to take care about this? So we gave it for free before, and now what's happening? Because this is also the other side of the medal, don't you think so?
Yes, when we introduced the quarantine soirees, we immediately asked for donations. We asked members or any audience member who watched these events, please support our musicians, because, you know, there are no concerts, there's no income right now, any other form of income. We hoped for some donations, but one of the reasons we created this series was to keep a connection with music lovers, with the fans of the orchestra. And we didn't hope for too much in terms of donations. And it surprised us even how much money still comes in every night. When the concert, I get the emails from the donations real time. And when the concert starts in the evening at 7:45 every evening CET, and the emails start coming with the donation amounts. So,
thank you.
Sorry, so the musicians can get together for these concerts, because in Spain it's not allowed.
Yes, it's only 3 or 4 people and they stand apart. And we have quite a few household members in the orchestra, husband and wife, and often they do chamber music together. And the pianist is always wearing a mask, and everybody is like 2 meters apart. So it's safe.
You can have audience as well?
No, there's no audience.
No audience, just recorded. Okay.
So one of the questions I asked Julia, which I will ask you as well, which is when all of this started, again, you know, this whole concept of, can we possibly ask for money from people, individuals at this time? Is it going to be perceived as something that's just taboo, to be honest, or just morally not the right thing to do? What was interesting about your story is your particular approach to that issue, because if I understand correctly, you didn't go and, you know, ask all of your supporters directly for, oh, we need more money now, this is a terrible time. You approached it in a very subtle way that was very much linked to the artistic side of things. Is that correct? And what advice would you have to others who are hesitating despite being in dire need for additional funding right now?
Julia, do you want to answer this first?
Okay, sorry. So I think, as Borja was saying, it really varies by country, because in our case, we cannot do that. You know, I'm talking about Spain. You know, we're thinking, we're organizing a concert in a festival in July. We always do in Santander with more than 50 concerts, and we don't know yet whether we will be able to do chamber music, you know, even with the social distance and everything, because currently it's not even allowed, you know, to do this kind of things. So I think it's great that you're showing us that way, that some matters, when the measures of confinement are less strict, we could follow. But I think, you know, the way to frame it is like more like a voluntary, like we're doing this not because this is not like a fundraising campaign, it's just showing our art, and you're voluntarily, you know, willing to support us. I think is the way is a great way to frame it.
Shoshana?
Yes, well, we want to give first before asking, and this has proved very successful in the past as well, that to give first always means a lot that comes back later. And what we feel about the quarantine soirees, which seems to give so much emotional support to so many people all over the world, I think it will definitely come back with positive results, both emotion-wise and financially as well. So we don't count on too much support coming in as a direct result of this, but in the long term, it will engage people.
Yeah. There are a couple of technical questions that have come through for you. One of them is pertaining to the Make-A-Wish requests, which are, I think, very innovative and catching a lot of people's attentions. Are those shown publicly, or is it just distributed privately to those who ask for it?
Yes, that was a question we asked ourselves, how we should broadcast these videos. And in the end, we decided to show them publicly on our Facebook page. And the reason for this was to promote the supporters club of the orchestra so that other people also can see how many wonderful opportunities being a member offers. So far there have been 5 videos broadcast, and the response has been very
That's
good.
great. One last question for you, and then we'll move on. I'll actually just read it out from one of our participants. And it pertains to your crowdfunding campaign. What was the message of the campaign? Were you asking for general support, for specific support in order to save a project that was at risk? And how did you cope with the inevitable comparison with the needs for the healthcare sector? And this is sort of a broader question that many ask, which is, you know, when there's so many priorities, how do you make arts a priority over things that, like health, that seem so front and center?
So the first question, sorry, could you repeat the first question again?
Sure. Just how did you message the crowdfunding campaign?
Yes, I think what the message said was about the musicians, support our musicians because they play to you personally, to you live right now and right here, despite the health crisis. And pardon? And yes, I think people can also understand now how wonderful these musicians are, what exceedingly that their talent can be so versatile in terms of chamber music. So sometimes these are violinists who are sitting in the second violin somewhere in the back, and then they come to the stage now in this chamber music series and they perform extraordinarily difficult piece with perfect technique and emotion, and this is also a tool to showcase their talent and versatility. And I think that the audience responds to this by supporting the actual musician.
Thank you. We're going to travel back east now a little bit, or back west. I can't even get my directions correctly, to Italy. And before we do so, I just want to continue to thank everybody for their comments and questions as we're going through this. We're running a little bit on the longer side for the interview portions because we've allowed questions as we're going through, which I think has been a good approach, and so we'll continue with that. But Andrea and Gabriele, let's probably plan on maybe about 10 minutes, and then we'll have at least a good 5-10 minutes for general questions at the end. So Andrea, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, thank you. Now we are finally arriving to the last of the panelists, which is Gabriel Zuchtriegel, and we are moving to Paestum, an archaeological site. And regarding the fundraising, I just want to tell to all the participants that in this case, what is important is the fact that this is a national museum. Gabriel Zuchtriegel was one of the super director that was appointed by the ministry in the past. Nowadays, the visitors are increasing year after year. Consider that in 2015, there were 300,000 visitors. In 2019, they were 443,000 visitors, with a lot of activities done in Paestum. And very interesting is also the relation with the fundraising in the local community. In this case, there is also, it's a state museum, so there is a very broad public support. But despite this, as well as the other, Paestum and his director, Gabriel Zuchtriegel, are facing issues during this emergency of coronavirus. Thank you for joining us, Gabriel.
Well, thank you all so much. And it has been so interesting listening also to the others. And I can only subscribe what you have said, in particular, Susanna, because I mean, Italy was never a communist country, but in a way, it was neither a completely capitalistic society. So we have a great tradition or we had in Italy, a great tradition of corporate funding, which essentially broke down totally during the rest of it, what remained during the financial crisis about 10 years ago. And so what we are, just like our friends in Budapest, trying to develop the individual donors and sponsorship. And what we have seen in the past 4 or 5 years, since we have a new model, as Andrea mentioned, in the management of these sites, so we have more autonomy. We have a board, and we have the possibility. We have our own bank account. I mean, that sounds funny maybe to some of you, but it's actually a novelty. So you can now make a donation directly to the Archaeological Park of Paestum. Before that, you had to give it to the ministry and then hope that it sometime would come back, trickle down to the site. And so this, what I think is, in this period, I mean, there has been the question, is it correct or is it a good idea to ask for money now? And actually, 2 weeks ago, I received an email from our fundraising consultant, and he was proposing a series of ideas, and I said, well, I admire your spirit in this period. And he said, well, it actually turns out that people during such a crisis tend, obviously, and I think it's understandable, to donate to hospitals and the civil protection service and so on. But what we're trying to do as our other friends and colleagues is to try to keep those who are already engaged close to us, and to go on after this. And in a way, I feel that it is also, I mean, it's really a tragedy, and especially in Italy, there's so many people suffering, and also many people who sadly died from the pandemic. And so it's all a very difficult situation, also in economic terms, of course, because much of our financing of our funds comes from the ticket sales. We have other funds from the government, so we are probably in a good situation as compared to institutions who draw mainly on private funding. But what we were trying to do in the last years is to develop an ethical approach to the topic of fundraising. And I think that in this moment, it is probably the way we'll to go also in the future. We don't have many big corporate funding and donors. We have, and this is really special and surprising in a way for southern Italy, which is in economic terms a very difficult area. So it can in no way be compared to northern Italy, which is one of the most developed areas in Europe. So we Paestum then is in a rural area, so we're not in a big city, and so. But in spite of all of that, we have had an extraordinary response from the area, from also very small companies and private donors who have really helped us doing restoration projects. And what we learned was new excavation. Paestum is a site where still research continues. Actually, on my desk, just found a new temple. So that's kind of one of the first reconstruction drawings we're doing right now. And so we also, in that case, we're trying to involve private sponsors and donors, but not so much with the objective to immediately increase our budget. That is, of course, important, but it's for us always linked to a relationship. So it's, for me, I always say it's one way to be connected to your community. Other ways are, you know, doing things with schools. Then we have a project with autistic children and young people, and many other things. But I always, for me, it's always important to see fundraising as something that is part of a relationship, and it's only one level. And the economic part is not the main, or it's of course important, but it's not the only aspect. There's also, as also Susanna and Julia mentioned, it's also a relationship with real people. And so what we're trying to do now is also to keep in touch with them, and, you know, all together survive and go through this very difficult period.
So in a way, again, we are assisting to the declination of the word fundraising into a more, in a way, let's say, customer engagement. So in this time where it's quite difficult to ask for specific monetary support in this economic crisis, all the institutions are trying to maintain and, you know, exploit and maintain and stimulate the relation that was established before, also in this period, for future exploitation in the future. Does it make sense or not?
In a way, yes, but I have some difficulties with the term customer, because what we're trying to do is, I mean, initially we have a big discussion about, you know, how far should state museums go in having a more kind of management approach. And but it's not that what I'm talking about. It's what we're trying to do. We have now a project, you know, that there are descendant communities, and it's a big issue for ethnological museums. So you have objects from communities also in other countries, often linked to colonialism. And then, so who does it belong to? Does it belong to the, the Paris Louvre because they brought it there in the 19th century, or should it be given back, and all this discussion? And we now are, I think the first park in Italy, certainly to try this, try this approach for a local community, because we have a tradition where the conservation of antiquities and the management and the ticket sales, it's all managed by the state, because the state, the ministry, has the technical knowledge and the structure to do that. And so there's kind of the idea, this belongs to the state. What we want to do is to engage with the local community and say, in a way, but it also belongs to you. I mean, it belongs to all of us. It's a public heritage. And so how can we find ways to express this mode of belonging in our daily practice as an archaeological park? So how can we, you know, share also ongoing excavations with the public, bring people in the depot, see what happens behind the scene? I mean, I think this is also a great moment for museums to show that it's not only the halls, you know, the showcases, but what are we doing? Yeah, people ask us, what are you doing now? I mean, people can't visit the site, they can't go into the museum. Are you still there? Yes, we are. We are working on the conservation, the publications, the excavations, the research is that is all going on, and it's always there. And now we try to bring it to the people through videos and posts and whatever. I think this is in a way that's what I meant when I said, well, it's not only about money. Money is important, but it's also a way to get into a debate on who is responsible and who owns the past and the monuments and the cultural heritage. And if you say, well, it's owned by all, then it's also easier to ask everybody to make a contribution.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Andrea, thank you, and thank you to Gabriel for those comments. With about 5 minutes left, I want to begin to wrap up a little bit. It's clear both from the size of the participation today and from the extent of the questions and comments that we're receiving from everyone that this is a theme that is really important to all of us here. And I think Bocconi, Andrea, and I are committed to continuing to make resources available and opportunities available for this group and others to continue to learn from each other. And so we will commit to figuring out additional ways to continue this conversation, perhaps a part 2 webinar like this in the coming couple of weeks with an additional set of panelists on specific aspects of the conversation to be able to come back to you with additional resources and answers to your own questions. This has been an incredibly, I think, eye-opening set of conversations and questions from everyone. We do want your feedback, and so in a moment you will see a poll that we will put up here for you to just give us your quick thoughts on whether this was a valuable use of 90 minutes. It certainly went by incredibly quickly from my perspective, and so hopefully it was useful and enlightening to everyone. I just want a couple of technical notes to mention. One is that this webinar is one of 3 that the Advisory Board for the Arts has done in the last few weeks on the topic of fundraising specifically. We had one just last week, in fact, in which we interviewed 4 major philanthropists in the United States about their perspective on how they're thinking about giving at this point in time. If you're interested in listening to that, it is on our website, advisoryboardarts.com, in the Arts Resilience Center, which is a center we've created to support arts organizations of all types anywhere in the world through this particular crisis. And there are quite a number of resources there. So I would encourage you to go take a look. They're all free. And the webinar series that we've been holding is there as well. Our next webinar is in fact next Tuesday. And Karen, may I ask you to just give a quick, brief overview of what we'll be covering?
Sure. The title of it is Rethinking Education in the Crisis, and we'll be talking with a Harvard instructional designer about how to think, and a theater organization about how they are thinking about supporting their education mission, and particularly how to think about quickly building instructional assets to support the education mission.
That's great. And so if you were interested in registering for that webinar, once again, just go to our website or go to register@advisoryarts.com and you will find an opportunity to do that there. If you're interested in learning more about the Advisory Board for the Arts and how we can help you through this moment, please feel free to do so through our website or directly to me at chris.denby@advisoryarts.com. Feel free to text me in the chat function if you want me to follow up with you on anything. But also to email me directly or to find me on LinkedIn, as some of you already have across this particular webinar. So in conclusion, you all are doing extraordinary work through extraordinary times. And I'm not just talking about our speakers today, I'm talking about the 250 of you on this call, on this webinar. So I wish you the best, and anything we can do to help, please let us know and reach out. I know Andrea shares that sentiment as well from his vantage point. Andrea, any last comments or thoughts from you?
I do think that as happens very often when we deal with arts management, I can assure that most of the times the great lesson is co-created. So I think that what the panelists told us were extremely important, as well as the list of questions and points that were raised during from the questions of the participant. I read about education, and you just mentioned that there will be a session dedicated to education next week. There is also all the issue regarding the health, the benefit of being exposed to art. That is a huge research on this topic, and most of the participants pointed out as something to be really focused on. So again, I do think that this networking is also a source of trust and make us actually more, in a way, positive in facing this terrible time. I mean, I had to turn off the microphone because there were some ambulances that were passing by. I live close to an hospital here. And thank you, everybody, above all, for the energy that you share with us.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you to Julia, to Gabriel, to Borja, to Susanna. This is a big investment of time at this incredibly busy moment, so I cannot thank you enough for participating and sharing your great stories. Good luck, everyone. Stay healthy, and hopefully we'll be seeing you again very soon for another one of these webinars. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.